So we're back with More Than Connect, Justin and Paul, and here to talk a little bit more about AI. And recently I had the pleasure of watching you speak at Cozy's Building Your Business event. You were asked to talk about AI and what it means for the construction industry. And I thought you did an awesome job kind of looking at the opportunity and real life applications in construction, and thought we'd sit down and talk a little bit more about it now that's fresh on your mind.
Yeah, cool. Before I forget it. And it was your pleasure, I think, because they were serving drinks at Brothers Lounge.
Hey, I left with one extra ticket.
You did.
So I was good.
I took that ticket.
So in your slide deck, you talked about the generative AI opportunity in construction. You want to kind of walk through what you outlined in the talk, and we can go from there.
Yeah. So a lot of people are talking about the impact that generative AI will have on the industries that we've come to expect will adopt technology. Ours being one, right? Software development. Certainly, everyone's talking about how generative AI makes coding faster, right? You can develop more code faster with generative AI. Certainly, industries like financial services, healthcare, life sciences, you're seeing lots of use cases, lots of discussion about the impact of generative AI. But there are industries that it will also have an impact in that are, call it kind of more legacy industries that traditionally have not been early adopters of technology. And yes, that can be viewed as an obstacle, but if they haven't been adopting a lot of technology, it's also an opportunity. Imagine what the impact is if now they finally do with generative AI.
Yeah, and I thought it was what the article from SAP we read was really eye-opening. It talks about productivity in construction space historically. So these stats are pretty nuts. They claim the U.S. labor productivity across all sectors from 1950 to 2020 is plus 230%. The advent of the internet, computers, really kickstarted productivity in most jobs. During the time period from 1970 to 2020, in construction, it was negative 1% per year. So we looked at that in preparation for this speaking engagement, and I mean, that's just crazy.
It is crazy. And if you notice, I did not say those numbers when I was standing on stage in front of construction company owners because I didn't want to get booed off the stage. Yep. But I mean, that's not our research. We're just presenting, hard facts about the construction industry. Yep. And I think some of the gains in computing don't always translate into construction, which is very manual labor intensive. Yeah. So and to that point, I didn't know this stat going in, but construction is actually the largest industry in the world.
Yes.
Right. Across the globe, it accounts for 14% of GDP. So that's a massive market. It's been slow to adopt technology, which you just said makes sense because it's material intensive, it's labor intensive, there's low margins, so there's some restriction to adopting technology. The opportunities, have you heard of construction projects that go over budget, over timeline? Like every project you've ever had on your house or right, any building construction, that's very, very common.
Right.
So you have that dynamic. You have the dynamic of the challenges with the labor force. 1 in 4 workers in construction are 55 or older. Almost 2 million are going to leave the industry just this year in 2024.
Yep.
So there's a challenge that AI can help with, and we'll talk through what those use cases are. The industry is also sitting on a lot of data, in some cases 40 years worth of data that they really haven't done much with, if anything. So there's an opportunity there. And so you can see how the combination of these things, well, generative AI could help with boosting productivity, preventing schedule overruns, improve cost effectiveness, bridge that labor gap where you have this massive amount of experience and knowledge leaving the industry.
Sure.
So at a high level, some analysts are saying if you look at all of these things in combination, you could see a 35% annual growth rate of generative AI in the construction industry alone. And 35% compounded annually, that's a big number.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as you're talking, that the idea of this aging workforce resonated with me because in a separate context, we developed a clinical decision support system for the labor and delivery process for obstetrics. And the number one feedback we have in commercializing that technology is like how much it helps young nurses in developing and bridging the knowledge gap between them entering that field and someone who's been doing it for 30 years, and the confidence that they're gaining by using the system and reinforced learning from using the system. So I think just taking how AI works in that context and looking at all these different industries that we hear of from across a lot of different industries, just labor shortage, knowledge gap, the aging workforce.
Yeah.
That the concept that AI can help in those contexts is abstracted from the actual industry, and I think those patterns can be applied in a lot of different ways.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. And it's where you have knowledge workers. Do you have knowledge workers in healthcare and life sciences? Of course you do.
Yep.
But you also have knowledge workers in construction. Absolutely. There are guys with 30, 40 years of experience with managing projects and materials and crews. They know the sequence jobs have to be run in, the tasks that have to be performed, in what order. Traditionally, what materials do you have to watch out for? You're potentially going to have supply chain issues with.
Yep.
How are you going to adopt your schedule accordingly? What are the safety requirements for a particular state, for a particular job? Somebody just walking into the industry, they don't know any of that stuff.
Yeah.
But if you can give them a tool that encompasses all that knowledge they can have at their fingertips, suddenly the guy walking in that has less than a year of experience, he has access to that, co-pilot.
Sure.
He's going to be much more effective, much quicker.
And I know you have a little bit of insight into this problem in your past life, and we've worked together a little bit in the past, and you had a highly technical, complex construction project you were leading and project managing, and we helped. And I know that we had like a lot of pretty high bandwidth, intelligent people looking at a pretty complex spreadsheet about how we get this person to this location at the same time this equipment's available at this location, and that, it was a very, very tough problem to solve.
Yeah, I didn't know you were going to bring this up, but you're absolutely right. And when you have that many variables of locations, especially if you have projects occurring in parallel around the world, on different continents, and you have timelines that are shifting in terms of what crews are available when. There are certain expertise on those crews that are required at certain points in that project. You have materials that you're counting on. There's dependency between tasks that need to be performed, the people that you need on site to perform the task, and the material that you need to show up at the right time so that that task can be completed. And when any of those things change, you're like, I don't know, I'm trying to juggle 40 variables in my head at the same time. And that role traditionally is handled by senior people who know the ins and outs of all of those things, right? They know the workers, they know their expertise, they know the vendors and the materials and the supply chain issues and how you juggle things around. But that's
they're subconsciously just figuring it out.
Yeah.
And they can't even articulate how they figure it out.
right. Yep.
Which is nuts.
It's their internal algorithm.
Yep. And I would say, adding to that, trying to find a traditional historical software package that can be flexible to do that is nearly impossible. So when we were working together, we were resorting to like Excel and Google Sheets, which as a software consultant, we sometimes always make fun of, and like this whole business runs on.
Yeah.
But there's nothing really off the shelf in the historical SaaS package, I think, that can handle a lot of these complex situations. And I think the emergence of Gen AI that can be more flexible and do some more natural language processing and reading between the lines is exciting for those use cases.
Yeah, absolutely. Because generative AI can dynamically shift that schedule around, provided you're feeding it the right data. It knows next week you're supposed to run piping.
Right.
Well, that pipe isn't going to show up for 3 more weeks because of it's on backlog.
Yep.
So how do you shift things around? Generative AI can dynamically do those shifts for you. We've talked about 2 of the use cases that we see in construction.
Yep.
For knowledge workers to use co-pilots, project scheduling. And so if we look at, these are not the only ones, but these are the ones that we see the most. We'll touch on 4 others. Certainly design, where you're seeing designers and architects use generative AI to run lots of simulations at the same time, trying to optimize for certain things. Like I want you to optimize the layout of 3 different rooms given this dimensional constraints. And we'll do a little bit of show and tell where we'll show kind of what some of these tools look like. That's one that we've seen. You've built some things in that design arena.
Yeah, within the MORE project, MORE initiative here internally, our kind of internal skunkworks AI research and innovation lab. That was one of the very first projects we kicked off, was using Stable Diffusion and ControlNet to allow someone to virtually renovate their house. And I'm still pretty bullish on that idea. There's been a lot of solutions in the market, and I think with all AI projects, the more control you give the end user to manipulate the outcome, the more powerful they become, right? Because out of the gate, they might develop something really cool like 5 out of 10 times, and it's just frustrating. But as this technology emerges, there's people, they're integrating. ControlNet was a good example, but also like I talked about on the LinkedIn post, Vigil AI, which they're one of these many text or image to video models out there. They just raised a Series A round of $20 million, and their differentiating factor, or their competitive advantage that they claim, is that in addition to these diffusion-based models that are generating the visuals, it's not just pixels. They have underneath that an understanding of when I generate a human in human form, there's physics and anatomy that is underneath that layer of pixels, and we need to make sure when we're displaying an image that it's actually obeying these laws of physics and structure. So I'm really big on pushing our team internally in this design arena to figure out, when you take the picture of the interior room, like most interiors are a cube, and most models doing this out there in the wild don't even understand that. They're just kind of relying on the fact that they know what the concept of room is, and they paint a picture of the room, but they're not adhering to any underlying model. So I think the design aspect is going to really take off as some of these more of these hybrid models emerge, where they're marrying diffusion-based systems, which are painting pixels, with some physics-backed or structure constraints. So I think that's a really exciting emerging use case that you see some of the fun things out there now, but it's going to be turned into real enterprise use cases very shortly.
And when you see the result of some of those tools, you get a bit of a bit of an eye-opening wow factor. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So we've touched on, I think we've got 3 left here. Safety obviously is one of them, right? And you're seeing things like hanging a camera on a construction site, and generative AI is getting really, really good at analyzing images and video and identifying objects. And in this case, one of the things that it can do is identify, oh, that's a human. That's a human with a head. That's a human with a head with a hard hat. Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Move on. Or that's a human with a head. I don't see any hard hat, and they're in a high risk area. Uh-oh, I need to alert somebody.
Yep. And we did an app for a major commercial roofing company. This was kind of pre-emergence of AI, and they had a lot of guidelines. So it was a tablet-based app, and they had the same exact checklist that you were talking about, where they were manually the foreman was manually check going through the list.
Yep.
I think at the other end of the spectrum is exactly what you said. Make that all camera based. I think in the middle ground for some people listening, like, well, that's pie in the sky, or I'm a smaller construction firm. The company we built this app for had a lot of concerns and restrictions about who can use the tablet, and they had to be away from the construction site because they don't want people looking down and doing this. So eventually these ubiquitous cameras will be everywhere, kind of helping people with the safety in real time. But I think the middle ground also is more reliable use of voice and two-way communication with these apps too. Can help in the safety realm. Like if there's anybody in construction using an application to do their job on the job site, we can limit the amount they're actually heads down typing or using their fingers, with a lot of voice interactions that are a lot better than it used to be 10 years ago. So
Yep. And you're touching on the inspection side of it as well, right? Like the amount of time that goes into inspections during a construction project, whether it's the general contractor inspecting what the subs are doing, or in a lot of cases you have, let's take for example a roof that cost in commercial applications that cost $2 million to install and has a 30-year warranty on it. The manufacturer of the materials used in that roof, that's the one providing the warranty. They're coming out to inspect that.
Yep.
And that's multiplied by 1,000, right? These inspections are happening for lots of different use cases. Of course, there's safety inspections, building codes. Are you meeting all the building codes?
Yeah, and some of these, as you talk about the materials, like the big thing we looked at was fastener patterns. Like this material needs to be attached to this one with 3 screws at the top and 4. I'm making stuff up. Construction guys are going to be like, this guy's a hack.
That's not how it works.
Anyway, there's a certain fastener pattern that needs to be put in place, and right now they're like zooming up on the pictures and looking at it, which is already an evolution from these pictures not being digital before. But the technology's there right now for just automatic identification of a fastener pattern from photo. So
it's a good example. So the last of the 6 is that we haven't talked about is cost estimating. And we mentioned there are firms sitting on 40 years worth of data of all of the estimates they've done, and then what was the actual result? How did that project get executed? How much did it actually cost? Where were your margins good? Where were they not good? And why? Generative AI can easily crunch through that data and tell you. We actually have that same issue where we have lots of data, of the same thing that we're also working on, really using generative AI to leverage to say,
Yep.
where were we really correct and had healthy margins? Where did we lose our shirt and why?
Yep.
So lots of industries have that.
Yeah, it's a Caden's actually working on that right now internally for us, is like a quoting tool using historical data and kind of able to reply to RFPs and things like that. So yeah, it's a great use case.
So we can move into a bit of show and tell, and there's some slides that we'll include and show, so we can actually show some of these. This one is for design, and you can see, given dimensional constraints, it is running simulations on several different rooms at the same time. And you can see what it's doing now. It's changing the layouts and showing, thousands of different patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that you'll see is you can do something like move a wall, and it is optimizing the layout for several different rooms at the same time, right? It's optimizing the layout based on just moving that one wall. It's optimizing the layout for the family room, the living room, the bedroom, a closet, and a bathroom. And you can see how it's doing that in real time. But then you can also tell it, yeah, but I also need you to optimize for, make sure we have enough square footage around stairwells, make sure you're optimizing for the family room, maximizing the space of the family room. That's the prime real estate. I want you to optimize foot patterns in and out of the family room. Make sure the bedrooms are positioned in such a way it's optimizing for light coming in through the windows. Mm-hmm. Optimize for air circulation throughout the house or the building. Just some examples of what this is being used for.
And checking those against building codes as well, right? It's making sure what it's generating isn't violating some building codes.
Yep, exactly. And you can feed the blueprint, right? Feed the blueprint into AI before you start construction.
Yep.
Well, have we violated anything here? And if so, give us a solution so we're not violating any building codes. The other thing for the inspection and monitoring that we talked about is this concept of digital twins. So you have a digital representation of the construction site where you're using sensors and IoT devices, you're feeding in supply chain data, so you get this continuous feed on the progress of the construction site. How are you utilizing resources? Any potential issues? Those could be safety issues that it identifies. It could be material constraint issues. Maybe you don't have material in the right place at the right time. And then again, back to the building code issue.
Yep.
It's one thing to identify in the blueprint. It's another thing to identify is the as is built the same as the design?
Yep.
And if it's not, is that okay, or are we violating any building codes?
And I think what's really, really fascinating about this technology is the emergence. So right now, like, breakthrough is LiDARs on every new iPhone. So you could do a 3D scan of these as-built construction sites and reconstruct a digital twin of it using an iPhone. I mean, it's not going to be as good as these high-quality 360 cameras out there, but there's a curve where these in your pockets catching up to a $5,000 camera.
Yeah.
Take that a step further. There's this emerging technology doing it just with, kind of going back to what we talked about, the design aspect of it, just with video. There's technology called neural radiance fields, NERFs, which series of images of the same scene can start to figure out, okay, this pixel from photo 1 is the same object, same location of this pixel in photo 2, starts to figure out position and how light's reflecting off of it, and all of a sudden it can train on the series of images and reconstruct a 3D virtual environment of it just without LiDAR, without 3D scan. So really exciting emerging technology coming on this field. And then I think too, like, if you have these cameras that are already doing these safety applications, it can easily be piggybacked off to do some of these other technologies for compliance. So.
That's true. And I'd like your point about, the big construction, multi-million-dollar firms out there, sure, they're leveraging technology like this. They're doing it now.
Right.
But smaller, medium, smaller size construction firms, I used to work for a medical device company, and we were retrofitting radiation vaults to put an MRI and a linear accelerator in. But we were a smaller firm, but these are $2 million construction projects. But some of the contractors were smaller firms, and they were walking in with an iPhone and just mapping the room with the LiDAR on their phone. They would get a blueprint with the full dimensions of that room and everything in it.
Yeah, the ARKit and Room Plan is built in the iOS SDK, and then they just like last year they started doing multi-room scans, so you could pretty much scan your entire house or an entire facility with your phone, it's just showing, okay, like 10 years ago, 5 years ago, it was a $5,000 camera to do this type of work, and now it's in everyone's iPhone.
And you already have it in your pocket. Yeah.
So
the next one we have is we talked about inspection and QA, and this is actually this slide that I'm showing is something actually that you built, which is just taking images and having generative AI identify property and building issues without anyone having to tell it anything.
Yep. Yeah, so going through the home buying process, and we work with people in the industry that do a lot of on-site inspections, but going through the home buying process recently, it's eye-opening. So you buy a house. I purchased my own home inspector as a private inspection to kind of go through that process. Mm-hmm. If I go and apply for a new insurance policy, insurance sometimes sends out an inspector into the field. And then the auditor and your bank and your mortgage and underwriting process, they might send someone out into the field. So there's a ton of industry sending, in the same transaction, multiple people to the property to probably answer the same questions. So it applies to a lot of different places. And again, I think it's the evolution, like we talked about, the safety application on site. The evolution of most user interfaces today are form-based. You're doing question and answers. Your interaction with those forms can be a lot better with AI. Like you mentioned, instead of kind of answering a direct, discrete data field question about the roof, in the future you could just start taking pictures of the roof, and it can infer the answers of the questions it needs. So speeding up the time of these inspections and making it easier, and the quality of life for the inspector is huge, I think.
Yep. And it saves a lot of time and money.
Yep.
We've talked about co-pilots. I guess just a little bit more. Actually, so in that talk, I brought up a very generic construction AI assistant, and I asked it for. I asked it a question. I said, "How many exits do you need for a restaurant?" And it gave a very legitimate answer, and I could tell there were people in the audience that were like, "Yeah, that's correct. It does need to be that difference or that far away from XYZ." And then someone in the crowd said, "Well, how do you know it's correct?"
Yeah, I thought you'd give a great answer to this too.
You don't. You don't know it's correct. If you are, the large language models have this ability to hallucinate. They really want to give you an answer.
Right.
But they are not obligated to give you a truthful answer. That's not in their training. But you can architect that into a solution. So you can have a retrieval augmented generation architecture where you are pointing it to a specific set of data and say, when I ask you a question, I need you to pull your answer from this data set.
Yep.
And don't make stuff up, and then cite where you got the answer from. And so we talked about, these newbies coming into the field of construction. How do you make them more productive, more valuable? You can take all of your company's data plus, building codes, standing operating procedures, safety procedures, material guides, material spec sheets. You could even have your most senior workers who are about to retire talk into a voice recorder that can be turned into text, right? The ideas that they have in their head just based on experience, and provide that as a co-pilot to workers in construction. But in order to make sure you get real, truthful answers, you have to build that into the way you architect the solution.
Sure.
And I can talk about that. You actually know how to do that. I guess we should probably end with if a firm is looking at how they would start potentially adopting generative AI in their field. And this, of course, this is for construction, but this is really for any industry. Anyone that comes to us and asks this question, we give this same recommended next steps. And the first is do a use case workshop. So before you significantly invest in generative AI, prove it out, prove the value to how you're going to use it. Identify the jobs that it's applicable to, the tasks per job it's applicable to, and then run a pilot. And so depending on the size of your organization, generally it should be representative, maybe 10% of your workforce, so you get a big enough sample size, but it's small enough so that you can be nimble and get off the ground quickly, gather feedback quickly, pilot the usage of these use cases to prove the value. Make sure as part of that pilot program you put in place some of the foundational things that are required, right? You need to make sure data security is in place. We hear horror stories about somebody goes to roll out, let's say, Microsoft Copilot. Now suddenly anyone that's using Microsoft Copilot can easily find anything on SharePoint. And in some cases, right, they find how much the person next to them is making, or they find a succession chart that doesn't have their name on it because their job was eliminated. Then the whole pilot has to get canceled. So get those foundational things in place as part of that workshop, and then make sure you include education and training. You can't just put the tools into everybody's hands and say, go be more productive, right? They have to understand, what are these things good for? What are the use cases that generative AI is good for? What is it not yet good for? They're not agents.
Sure.
Yet.
Yep.
Right? It's not going to take over the mouse and click through screens and perform tasks just yet. So given current capabilities, what should you apply it to? Make sure they have that training and they have a forum to provide feedback, because if they have that forum to provide feedback, once they get comfortable using the tools, they'll identify, if you ask them, well, what other things could it help you do or give us competitive advantage if that tool is extended to do X, Y, Z?
Yep. The thing I love about this approach, especially now, is step one, the use case workshop. As long as you're being careful about the security and limiting the scope of it, I think a great way to get started is just use an off-the-shelf tool. So if it's in design, you could Google and find some interior AI design tools that you can play around with. It's not going to be perfect, but you can get a feel for the use case, and we can help connect the dots between, it's not perfect, but with some customization, we can get it to achieve this level of success. Or if it's the chatbot, like even internally, when we have a new idea, we almost prototype everything using a custom GPT or chat GPT. That'll get you a feel for what this user experience is going to be, what the value could be, and knowing it's not going to be perfect out of the gate. Kind of next phase is creating a custom orchestrated solution with technologies like RAG, but out of the gate, to kind of get a feel for use cases and get some temperature of the value it can create, you can find off-the-shelf tools nowadays for a lot of the kind of step one of this. So it's not a huge barrier to entry.
Yep, that's a great point. I mean, we're a custom software development shop, and that's what we started.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what we started with. Well, I think that does it.
Wraps it up. I hope we get some more opportunities, maybe with Cozy in the future, to talk about some other industries. But if not, I think makes sense for us to continue kind of looking at an industry by industry basis on here, because I thought that was really eye-opening for me, even some of these use cases I haven't really fully considered. So great job. It's a pleasure being in the audience and drinking the free drinks.
Thanks, Cozy.
Yep, thanks.
We'll be back. Thanks, Justin.
Yep, thank you.